This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 371 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I am in Southern California for this episode right here. Actually, I think we're in Torrance, just south of LA proper. Joining me for this episode is Victor Novak. Welcome to the podcast, Victor.
Very happy to be here. Usually when I hear my name, I hear boo. No, I'm kidding.
Victor, you're an old head in this Southern California beer scene.
Yep.
Been around for a long time. Have mentored and taught some pretty influential brewers out there. One in particular, Evan Price of Green Cheek,
yep.
Who brewed for you at Taps, and then of course you were the founding brewmaster for Golden Road. Interestingly enough.
Well, I was a founding brewmaster for Taps, and then I came into Golden Road actually a little bit after a couple of brewmasters there, but all good. And I always say that I worked with Evan. I learned a lot from Evan. I don't feel that I mentored him. I need to be, bring the ego down a little bit. Evan's phenomenal in his own way, I've worked with some. He
absolutely is, but I just have to tweak him by stating it that way because as much as I love Evan, you still you got to tweak a little bit.
Bring him down. Yeah, I'm amazed he's still talking to me. He's on a different level now. So
well, nowadays you're heading up innovation at Figueroa Mountain and back brewing a lot of lager for Figueroa Mountain. And so your brewing career has spanned a whole bunch of things. It's spanned, of course, traditional beer styles in decades past. Mm-hmm. You've, of course, brewed IPA, you've brewed lager, and, then, of course, in the Golden Road era, you really brewed a lot of fruit beers. And so you've been very, you've embraced this kind of innovation. And now you're at Figueroa, you're also, you bring all of these things concurrently with a solid background in lagers and doing a lot of work in lagers, but also brewing progressive beer styles.
Adapt or die. Yep.
And so I think, our general thematic hook for this episode is going to be rooting progressive experimentation in classic technique and classic understanding. And that's going to be the framework that we hang this on as we dig in and get your perspective both on lager brewing and contemporary lager brewing here in the United States and in brewing progressive fruit beers and finding the common thread between those things. Kind of crazy. Before we do that, at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer. But don't just take it from me.
This is Andy Joint of Big Grove Brewery. We've been using G&D Chillers from the beginning, and from our original 3.5 barrel pub system up to our production brewery. We've been able to rely on G&D to provide a high-quality chiller, help us with design and layout, and provide support whenever we need it.
Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring of your new G&D chiller. And ProBrew is the industry partner that brewers trust to take their operations to the next level, especially when it comes to canning their product for distribution. By partnering with ProBrew, brewers can fill and seam their canned product. It ranges from 100 to 600 cans per minute. Their unique filling process also ensures low dissolved oxygen pickup and focuses on product quality during the entire process. For more information, visit probrew.com or email them at contactus@probrew.com. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, you might have heard of Old Orchard, but have you heard of their newest flavors? Berry Blend, Blood Orange Lemonade, and Tart Cherry are the latest additions to their lineup of flavored craft juice concentrate blends. Old Orchard's R&D team can also formulate custom blends unique to your needs. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. So, Victor, you listened to the podcast, and before we started this, I should just tell everyone your biggest critique is how long we spend on background. So you're going to give us the speed background, okay? You've got 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes,
need no more than,
and the timer is running right now. So so give us your arc through brewing.
And not to be critical, no, but sometimes it's like, let's get to the meat and potatoes, man. It's like, you've got, I appreciate your background or her background, and I try, and I'm more of an introvert. I do not like talking about myself myself. I love talking about beer. I love talking about beverage and history and culture and tradition, all that good stuff. But yeah, so
I love some good feedback. I'm just messing with you. Like,
no, totally.
I totally appreciate that.
Yeah. So geez, go back, went to UC Berkeley from 84 to 88, graduated from there, met a gal, moved to Philadelphia. She got into grad school at the University of Pennsylvania, so ended up in the great city of Philadelphia. Christmas of 92, she got me a home brewing kit because we love Sierra Nevada Pale. That was both of our epiphany beer, and we couldn't get it. We'd have to go maybe down to Maryland or DC. We couldn't get it in Philadelphia, so she got me a homebrew kit to make effectively Sierra Nevada Pale. And then I got Michael Jackson's World Guide to Beer. And literally, I can still remember, the night and where I was, and I was on the couch, and I'm like, oh my God, this is exactly what I want to do. History, tradition, culture, travel, beverage, so many things that are associated with culture. And, as a cultural political geographer at Cal. So, took this homebrew kit and, Michael Jackson's World Guide to Beer and Charlie Papazian's Complete Joy of Homebrewing. I'm hooked. Got a job at Dock Street Brewery and Restaurant June 1st of 93 as a server, and eventually bartender with the intention of becoming a brewer there, which I did in October of 95. Just a great place to learn. Philadelphia with Tom Peters, not really at Monk's at the time. Copa 2, bringing in just kegs from Belgium just so he could put them on tap, and then would recycle the keg. It was crazy. And then Will Reed opened up Standard Tap, and just a lot of, great people there in the beer scene in Philly. And again, at Dock Street, brewing classic styles. I didn't know, coming from San Francisco and the Bay Area, we thought we knew everything. I'm like, what is this Kolsch? What is a cream ale? What is a Schwarzbier? Imperial Russian Stout, and all these great classic styles. So I was hooked, and eventually got into the brewery and got my classic training, I think, under a guy named Nick Fennell, and just learned there to make Belgian and German and Czech classic styles on open fermenters, which was really cool. We'd make a Belgian triple next to a Helles, and we're thinking, oh my God, it's going to cross-contaminate, but it all worked, and we went into secondaries and then, kegged everything. And then from there, the liquor laws changed in January 1 of 97. So I was going to be the junior brewer, and they were going to bring in beers. At the time, actually, in Pennsylvania, if you made beer, you could only serve your beer on premise.
Right.
And then January 1, 97, they could start bringing in some of the contract stuff. So writing was on the wall, moved back to California. Got a job at a place called Doc's Brew Pub in Simi Valley. And
you went from Dock Street to Doc's Brew Pub.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Yeah, 2 doctors, and kind of thought they knew everything about the restaurant business, but didn't go well. 5 months later, that closed, and then shortly thereafter ended up at Taps Fish House and Brewery in 99. Was a brewmaster there for 15 years. Again, classic styles, traditional ales and lagers was our tagline, and then did my thing there. I'm like, I need a challenge, and then moved on to Golden Road in 2014, the year before the acquisition. And then, AB came calling, and I remained the brewmaster, but I was doing a lot of innovation at our Anaheim brewery with a guy named Steven Torres, who's a phenomenal brewer. And all those, mango card and all the kind of fruit beers and ride-ons and things that we created at Golden Road, they're still making. And then...
You guys created Mango Card.
We did, yeah.
Damn.
From a bench trial, from a 500 ml beaker to now about 200,000 barrel beer, which I think is pretty cool. I'm proud of that. Gold medal at I think it was a 2018 World Beer Cup. So, it's 50% wheat, 50% churro, and some beautiful Oregon fruit mango, and then just a little top note from Sovereign. So the recipe's out there. They're not going to kill me. And who's going to replicate it? And
has the NDA expired already?
Yeah. Luckily, I didn't have one. But and then from there, you kind of you're working for the largest beverage company, which I learned a ton. And
Sure.
That's kind of the interesting thing is I've gone very small scale to the largest beverage company on the planet, and now to Figueroa Mountain as the innovation director, and Kevin Ashford, the brewmaster there. We were very much aligned in how we think. We're both classically trained, I think, in terms of lager, but again, adapt or die and come up with some interesting styles, these alternative hop products, and again, fruit beers, kettle sours, all that kind of stuff. So it's been a really interesting journey. I've learned a ton, of course, learned from amazing people at World Beer Cup, and these kind of conversations is where I learn. And your podcast has been phenomenal. I remember, Kelsey and Evan and Vinny thanking you for this podcast and stroking the ego, but you deserve it because us as brewers, we know we're in our little bubble and we know what we know, but we also don't know what we don't know. And you hear other brewers talking about different ways of doing hazies and decoction versus not. And you are on for me, sometimes an hour or 2 hour commute and get the wheels turning. And what keeps me fascinated and loving this industry 30 plus years in is there's always something new to learn, and again, the 702, I mean, again, these cold side, hop products, I'm just kind of getting into. I'm still more kind of traditional double dry hop, but if you are open-minded and you're curious, this is fascinating.
All right. Well, you're embarrassing me now, Victor, and I might have to edit all of that piece out just because I feel self-conscious about that, but I appreciate that.
Ridiculous.
And, I think that the beautiful thing about all of this is that we can have these conversations and we have brewers, and that's the beautiful thing about this culture of people wanting to also share back to the community of brewers 100%. So that beer can get better. Not just, and those people that learn from others, and those that have shared have built these foundations that other people have been able to build off of.
Right.
And it's just like open source, in that community, you have to keep giving back, and that's what the whole community depends on. And so nonetheless, we did that. That was, we're going on 7 minutes now. And so,
how did I do that? I tried to be so quick.
We're trying to be quick. In order to get right to the killer, we're going to start talking about lager brewing. Mm-hmm. We've got some Dunkel and some Schwartz in front of us.
Yep.
And of course, we have another episode where I did with Kevin Ashford from Figueroa a few years ago. Great approach there. We're going to dive into your approach, and the way that you think about lager, because you definitely have your own approach based on ingredients as they're currently available, and those techniques that you should use, those techniques that are less, I shouldn't say you shouldn't use, that you choose not to use because you don't feel that you need them to make the beers that you make.
Right.
And we're going to talk about both of those sides of things. We're going to really talk about the maltier side of lager, I think. Just because, again, that's what we're drinking right now. And we're coming but as this comes out, transitioning from summer season into fall, and some of these things make a lot more sense. Before we do that, experience distinct transparency and juiciness with Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5. Using their Lumina technology, Omega genetically eliminated haze in the popular British 5 strain, allowing you to preserve the fruit-boosting prowess while achieving crystal clarity. It's perfect for modern West Coast IPAs. Learn more at info@omegayeast.com. And seam defects caused by minimal overlap may not be immediately apparent, but they can become problematic during distribution, leading to leaky pallets. Just because you're not experiencing leaks at your facility doesn't mean you're entirely safe. RSS Macklin offers training to help you understand not only what is happening with your can seams, but also what you can do to fix it. Their comprehensive training ensures that you are equipped to identify and make proper corrective actions before they escalate. Visit them at rssmacklin.com. That's rssmacklin.com, or email service@rssmacklin.com. Also, if you're a brewery or distillery and planning or interested in adding a brewery or distillery to your existing craft beverage business, visit breweryworkshop.com now and secure your spot in our upcoming brewery and distillery workshop this September in Fort Collins, Colorado. Opening or purchasing a brewery or distillery today is rife with challenges, and the things you don't know that you don't know could be the difference between failure and success. Invest in the success of your business with this 4-day intensive filled with panel discussions, small group sessions, technical tours, and more. Learn more at breweryworkshop.com. All right, Victor, where do you want to start on lagers? Where do you start? Where do you start?
I start with water.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been lucky. Philadelphia had pretty soft water, and I've been fortunate enough to use RO water pretty much my whole career. So, I read the water book from John Palmer, of course, and for the most part, I just look for in that
Did you understand it?
I actually did. I geeked out on that one. I remember Evan saying, I love how people have different perspectives on, the malt book to me was a little more difficult. That got very technical. But the water book, John Palmer and Martin Brudgard just made it very fascinating, understandable. But you kind of break it down basically to what minerals am I going to, concentrate? You're taking everything out for the most part. These RO machines are pretty amazing. And I get it in Southern California. It's not ideal. You're losing like 25%, not as, great, environmentally and ecologically, but you do get that blank slate to start with, and then usually go for about 100 ppm or so of calcium and, chloride, you're going to kind of end up where you end up probably about 125. And then my sulfate, the chloride to sulfate ratio, I'm definitely going more chloride heavy. I still remember distinctly, I made an alt beer where I was going to kick up the sulfate and, try to get a little bit more drier on that side. And it was the most astringent, probably not undrinkable, but for me, the most unpleasant alt beer. So now I've kind of gone back and emphasized more of the chloride. And, so you build your water profile depending on kind of the style, but sometimes I'll just make it, okay, this is Figueroa Mountain, this is whoever I'm brewing for, and this is kind of the standard mineral profile as long as we're hitting the calcium, the chloride, and the sulfate. I don't add magnesium. I think we got plenty in there in the malt. And then, again, look at the style. Are we making a Helles? Are we going to make a Dunkel? Are we going to make an Oscura? And, this whole decoction.
Oscura, huh?
Oscura's great. I've been making that style. It's amazing. Going back to Dock Street, 92, 93, they were making this Santiago Graf, darker Vienna style, which I find fascinating. And, you look at me and I look like some Eastern European Polak, but I'm half Mexican, I'm very proud of that. And so this is a style that I've always emphasized, and especially being from Southern California with our Latino community, really took pride around Cinco de Mayo. Of course, September 16th is their independence, but we in America focus on Cinco de Mayo. So release it around then, and it's kind of like a lighter Dunkel and, little Cara Munich, little Cara Vienne. In the Mexican style, I might add a little bit of rice, maybe 10% just to lighten up the body.
Rice, not corn?
I was going to say corn. I've had too many beers where you do get a little bit of that kind of DMS-y corn character, but I've had others that it's completely hidden. But for me, I'm looking to lighten the body, and rice is done very well, about 10, 12%. And so you get this very drinkable, malty, slightly toasty, just beautiful style. You kind of harken back to, 1850s and whatnot. And it's just an incredible beer. That kind of, negative Modelo. Most people are drinking, Modelo Special. Sure. It's like, no, let's mix it up a little bit, especially with carnitas and carne asada, and it just goes beautifully well. And again, loving the cultural aspect of beer. Yeah, that's one I really like to emphasize.
So that beer is really dark in color, but not necessarily roasty in flavor.
Nope.
How do you achieve, because it still needs to be a light drinking Mexican lager. How do you accomplish that?
Just a hint of chocolate, a little bit of carafa malt, and keeping the gravity down, maybe 11.5, 11 Plato. That's going to attenuate down to maybe 2.3. Light, it's crisp, and then you get this, just a little bit of sort of toasty, almost toffee note on the nose and on the palate. But man, it's so drinkable, and again, it's great with Mexican food. It's great with Thai, kind of calm that heat a little bit. But it's not just as we find in Southern California, and I still brew. I'm not sitting behind a desk and having, a couple assistants brew. So I'm in the brew house, and it's very close to the bar, and I listen to guests. And right here in Southern California in 2024, it's light and IPA. So I'll go behind the bar and give them a sample of the Schwarzbier or the Dunkel and kettle sour that we're doing, and show them, that we've got 20 beers, 25 beers on tap, and look at the depth and breadth of styles that we can do. And yeah, Southern California, we're known for IPA, but Figueroa Mountain, I feel in many ways in my background is lager beer. We do Lagerville. In fact, I'm wearing the Lagerville t-shirt, just happened to be wearing that. So this incredible festival we do in April and all lagers and, and now it's no longer session IPA. I talked to Bob at Highland Park and I'm like, what the F is up with this, West Coast pills? It's either, for me, it's German or it's Bo. And he's like, how many session IPAs do you see nowadays? I'm like, almost none. He goes, well, there you go. It's kind of like taking that 5.5% lighter drinking beer, but you hop it beautifully. And I'm like, makes perfect sense now. So now we make a West Coast IPA or West Coast Pills. Of course, they make it beautifully, and we're still trying to reach that level. But that's the beautiful thing about new styles and learning new things as a brewer, and being here around the Green Cheeks and the Highland Parks and North Park and all the other great breweries in this area is I get my competitive juices flowing, and it's like, hey, it's probably better than I'm doing right now, and I'm going to work a little harder. And again, this podcast and the magazine is exactly what that's for, is to share information. They're very open about that kind of, and Russian Vinny at Russian River and Matt have always been open, publishing the recipes. And Jason Oliver over at Devil's Backbone, I'm like, this is amazing. These guys are very open with their information. I should be too. And I learned that pretty early on in the Philly beer scene, is like, hey, it's not proprietary. I can give you the exact recipe. You're not, in fact, you've seen, these articles and studies been done. Same recipe, 3 different breweries, 3 different beers. Relax. Nobody's going to steal your recipe and make the next latest and greatest beer and put you out of business. I mean, this is literally what I'm in this for. And I've been doing it. Like I said, I love talking to brewers, I don't really say mentor brewers, but, share information and let's all get better. It sounds, a little pie in the sky, but it's true. That's really what keeps me going.
All right, we just got sidetracked from talking about lager brewing process into Victor Novak's hot takes.
Hospitality, exactly.
Which, I don't mind. Totally. But I want to let's steer this back. You want the podcast to focus on brewing killer and not the... so let's go back to talking about that process realm where you start with water.
Yep.
Obviously, in some of these beers, especially dark lager beer styles, you start thinking about balancing. Maybe we should just talk about Dunkel in particular.
Yeah.
Because this Dunkel has a phenomenal name.
Yeah, neither Kevin or I named it. Yeah, I think that was the owner, Jamie Dietenhofer, but it's all good. We'll give him credit for that. But yeah. I'll let you give it.
It's I dunkled in my pants.
Yeah. And it's won several medals and this is Kevin's recipe, but I was, lucky enough to brew it over in Westlake, and it just, to me, it's got this beautiful toastiness, a little bit of Munich malt and crystal malt. And
when you say a little bit, what do you mean by those?
About maybe 10, 15%. I don't have the exact recipe in front of me, but the one thing I found with Munich malt, and I know a lot of brewers want to brew a Dunkel with 100% or 80%, Munich. And to me, those beers have always come off astringent. I think Pilsner malt, again, that I always qualify. This is what works for me. If you think I'm completely insane and this has worked for you, that's great. All I know is every time I've had a more than 50% Munich malt Dunkel, it's undrinkable. It just gets too astringent, and I pick it up immediately. So,
what do you think is causing that astringency?
I just think that the kilning, the way that they create Munich malt as opposed to Vienna, you get a little bit more of the the husky, slight astringency, where a Pilsner malt is going to give you softness and roundness and the malt character, and the Munich can build on that, and you can, get some of those more complex, slight melanoidin characters, a little slightly higher Lovabond on that Munich. But man, as a base malt, for me, again, and I've had several of them, I find it more than 25%. I find it not quite as round and smooth as you would find as, for me, the epitome, which is Augustiner Dunkel.
So then you are building, or you all, Figueroa builds the bulk of this then with Pilsner-based malt, highlights with some Munich what's the typical kind of rough balance between those two?
I think you're looking like 85-15 and a little bit of chocolate, a little bit, yeah. So again, these I don't know if I can actually reach over and take a look at the recipe, but it's something that I think is adding that Pilsner malt is adding the roundness, and then you complement. For me, again, we can get in, process wise with decoction and whatnot, but for what I've seen, and again, pat yourself on the back with the medals that I've won with Schwarzbier and Kevin's won on Dunkel and whatnot. The decoction, again, if you're doing it, like Charlie Bamforth says, if you've been doing decoction and people love your beer, keep doing it. But to create a new recipe, he says, I would, the depth and breadth of malts that are available from, Castle, Environment, and, all the suppliers that are out there, you can build this beautiful malt character with malt as opposed to decocting, which is generally meant for under-modified malt. Where yes, over T is over 40. You don't have under-modified malt. You're doing well. It's perfectly modified. You can do a single step. You don't even need to do, as I used to do, a step infusion. And then I worked on a brewery at our Corona location when I was at Taps that I couldn't do it. And then we won, I think it was silver at GABF with our Schwarzbier single step infusion. I'm like, okay, change, adapt the mindset a little bit. You can read about what you're supposed to do or what's traditional, but what works and what tastes great. And you look at brewery to brewery and you see some that decoct and some that don't, and they both make phenomenal lager beer. So there is absolutely not one way to do it. When somebody tells me that, I'm like, okay, it's a little bit, you've been indoctrinated in a certain way, and that's fine. Again, if you've been doing decoction, that's great. But I tend to
embrace all of the techniques here in the Craft Beer Brewing Podcast.
As long as the beer is great.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's not that there's a way to do things. There are many ways to do things in ways that are compelling, winning, etc. Yeah, and there's that ABGB method of conical fermentation and no decoction, which can make repeat medal winning lagers, and then there are the beautiful cohesion or Bierstadt ways of making very decocted lager consistently that are also equally valid, beautiful beers I love to drink too. And I think we can all enjoy both of those experiences, but it's just interesting to get your take. And
I love the spirited conversation on that with those that love decoct. And again, it's to each his or her own. And if it works for you, great. But
I have an unnatural number of conversations with Joe Stang, our executive editor, about the merits of decoction. Really, we just probably shouldn't talk about it quite as much as we do. But, that's the problem of being a beer nerd or brewing nerd.
Yep. So then you've got your malt bill, depending on the style. And, I've got my background from Dock Street, and I often use that as a platform. I, still kind of have those recipes. They may not know that, but, use that as inspiration. Hey, this is what worked. And then you kind of take those from place to place. And just like a chef, they have their French background or Italian, and they're going to take that to maybe their next place, or they own it. And then you look at, of course, hops I find if you're going to make a traditional Dunkel, traditional Schwarzbier, German malt, German hops, and then you're going to use either, the 3470. We love the Augustiner. I think it's a great yeast. And so then you look at temperature.
What do you love about Augustiner yeast?
It's clean.
Because obviously there are those folks out there that, the sulfur component that Augustiner produces, maybe rubs some people the wrong way.
Yeah. But if you lager it long enough.
Yeah. And you have, as you have told me, you are pretty sensitive to sulfur. And so you have your own thing about that. How do you manage fermentation with that Augustiner yeast?
Yeah. Generally, what I like to do is knock out about 48 degrees, ferment about 49, until, say it's a 11 Plato beer. When it gets to about 5 Plato, then I'm going to let it rise. I know I've heard other podcasts where, whether you're going to let that de-rest at 58 to 60 degrees happen. Okay, you're an ale brewer at that point. I don't agree. I mean, I think the vast majority of esters and flavors that are going to be produced are the first 48 hours. After that, You're free to let it free rise up to, 58 degrees, maybe 60 for your de-rest, and then let that finish out. We'll spoon it, and keep that about 7 to 8 PSI. I don't necessarily go up to 15. And you build up some of that beautiful, soft, natural carbonation. And, and then I'll start dumping yeast actually pretty early, day 6, day 7. If we're going to harvest, that works out great. But, in a pub setting, for the most part, it's one and done. Dried yeast, or I can get, a liquid pitch from our Buellton location. And then that's the key to me is start I hear your other guys shaving the cone and whatnot, but getting that yeast off the beer is absolutely key. And sure, you're going to get sulfur, whether it's 3470 or whether it's Augustiner, you're going to get a little bit of stress at those lower temperatures, but you let that lager long enough, and then as I pass D, drop it about 3 degrees a day, kind of softly bring that down. Don't just crash it. Although, when I was at the Golden Road, we had to kind of get that going a little faster on maybe a Mexican lager. I've done that as well, to not bad effect. I mean, again, you can adapt on depending on the brewery and the need. But generally, it's 3 degrees a day. So start to finish, most lagers are 6 to 7 weeks. And then if I do pick up a little bit of that sulfur, the technique that I was taught is sulfur is going to reach an equilibrium in that headspace. And then if you keep it, 10, 15 PSI, although generally I'll keep it at 5 because I know I'm going to need to do this, is you bleed off that sulfur. And over 3, 4, 5 days, that will dissipate. And then you can continue lagering, and then you can maybe bring it up to 15 PSI and get more of that natural carbonation. And it's a beautiful way to, gently make that lager, but slowly dissipate that sulfur. I am hypersensitive to it. I'm pretty much blind to diacetyl. Talking to Eric Warner who wrote the Kolsch book and the Hefeweizen book, we had this little panel that we were doing, and he said exactly what I think. If you can kind of bring the glass to your nose and you're already picking up sulfur, it's too much. Some people are like, well, sulfur is okay. A little sulfur is okay in lager. To me, if it's well integrated with the hops and the malt and it's barely perceptible, fine. But once I pick up I'm picking up SO2 or H2S or whatever, way too much. And I want that sulfur gone. So for the most part, we don't release a beer, at least when I'm brewing in my brewery, until I pass it on the sulfur. Clean.
Interesting. So, you've whipped through this process here. Tell me about, the difference between making a fine, high quality version of, say, the Dunkel or Schwartz beer, and what you think those key points are that really differentiate between an average beer and an excellent award-winning beer. What are some of those key points as you are tasting and brewing and kind of, managing to them that you think are absolutely crucial to kind of differentiate an award-winning lager in this darker style?
Darker style, or even going to Pils or Helles. I mean, a classic, world-class lager to me starts with, again, the water. If you have high alkaline water like we do in LA, it's really hard to make, I think, a really beautiful German Pils. Works great for Schwartz beer. I want 100%, carbon filtered LA city water because the alkalinity is great and the dark malt and everything balances out. You hit your mash pH, you hit your knockout pH, you hit your finished beer pH, and pH is key. That's really what I focus on, is really hitting the mash pH, really the knockout pH, whether it's a hazy, whether, I love hearing, people geek out. Again, I go back to that, especially the IPA podcast, because they're really focusing on not even hops, right? They're talking about process. And the same thing is true for lager. If you drop that pH too low, especially on a dark beer, if you're knocking out at 5, and that beer finishes out at 4.1. Now you've got this sharp acidity. You've got the dark malt for one, and then you've got this lower pH, and it just comes off too astringent. It comes off too harsh. So again, baking soda is your friend to make sure you're knocking out at 5.2, 5.25. Finished beer pH about 4.3, 4.4. rounder, softer. Where if I'm doing a Helles or a Pils, I'm knocking out at 5 to 5.1. I want it crisp. I want it snappy, not acidic, but I want it crisp. And so definitely playing with that. The mash pH, I'm usually right at 5.5, 5.4 to 5.5. Again, that's the sort of pH optima for your alpha amylase, beta amylase. I don't really play with that too much, but I play with the knockout pH, and I really work to hit that finished beer pH, depending on the style. And for dark beer, I can't really get much below 4.3. Otherwise, it's going to get sharp, and it's going to be, the malt. You're going to lose that roundness from the maltiness.
Sure. Well, let's, I'm curious to talk about some of your lager experimentation and some of the things that you might be stretching out with and tackling and learning from.
Yep.
Obviously because in your position of doing innovation for Figueroa Mountain, I know that you're tackling some of these projects. Let's talk about that for a little bit. But first, Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. Brewers worldwide trust Indie's unique varieties, Strata, Lorien, Luminosa, Meridian, and Audacia, to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Indie also offers classics that thrive in Oregon terroirs, such as Chinook, Crystal, and Sterling. Thoughtfully crafted and selected hops to meet your brewing needs. Visit indiehops.com/podcast to discover what's new in hop flavors. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And Berkeley Yeast, founded by bioengineers, yeast that's designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency, increase efficiency, and save you money. If you've been following yeast, I'm sure you've heard about their strains. Super Bloom strains make classic hops flavors. Fresh strains keep diacetyl low, even with large hop additions. Tropics strains make a tropical bouquet reminiscent of the finest Southern Hemisphere hops. And they just dropped new strains that are even more futuristic. Nationwide free shipping. Mention this podcast for 20% off your first order. And if you're a brewer who's also interested in distilling, subscribe now to the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast, available on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Hosted by Sydney Jones of Heaven Hill and Molly Troop, master distiller for Freeland Spirits in Portland, Oregon. This podcast explores the technical and creative processes behind great spirits through conversations with some of the leading distillers working today. It's everything you love about the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast, but focused on distilling. Click on the link in the show notes and give it a listen. All right, Victor. So where's innovation taking you in the lager space right now? You've got these beers that you brew a lot of, Schwartz, Dunkel, et cetera, the Figueroa Mountain favorites, but you're also, trying to learn and trying to tackle new things and filling out tap lines. Where's innovation taking you in the lager space these days?
One of the really cool ones we did was a hoppy rice lager. And, about 12-14% rice, again, light in that body. It's kind of the cold IPA idea, right? And, but lower OG, so super light, crisp. And then, you kind of do the hop dipping or, the hop keep or the Dynaboost or any of the cold side flowable hop products. But what I actually did on this one, and I've talked to other brewers about doing it, is right at knockout with the yeast and little ALDC is just add maybe, anywhere from 11 to 22 pounds of hop pellets. Not as efficient on a production side, but man, you really do get that biotransformation. And we did it with
You are biotransforming lager?
Yes, and I think that's obviously a thing. But yeah, I mean, you're starting with we did the Siegel Ranch Cashmere, which is absolutely beautiful, and put in 22 pounds, kind of get your initial dry hop going there. And then just did another single dry hop after that. And man, it was popping. It was, it was melon. It was a little bit of stone fruit, little citrus. And, it was a cool little thing that we, 5%, nice, light, crisp. And you tell people, hey, it's kind of a rice lager, which is definitely kind of a cool thing for your average beer drinker. And but then when they taste a little bit of that, we actually use Mosaic on that as well. That you're going to get this kind of berry character, and it wasn't over the top dry hop. It was more just think of it like a Sapporo with a little bit of a hop nose.
So tell me about this biotransforming with your Augustiner yeast and how that works. I mean, because you obviously could just simply finish fermentation, pull that yeast, and, repitch, keep it clean, and then dry hop. But there has to be something to it if you're going to throw pellets in there at knockout.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
what do you think? What are you gaining from this?
So what I think is, again, this is still in terms of dry hopping and when are you dry hopping? You're going to dry hop, partway through fermentation. Are you doing kind of the Kelsey method of the hop dipping, or the, the flowable hop product, and put it into a barrel and let it kind of sit, and then, all that stuff's going in the fermenter, or you're going to put it in the whirlpool. But I found that adding the hops with the yeast is just adding everything we're looking for. You're looking for brightness. You're looking not for muddled hop character, and it pops. And then you add an extra layer. It's never linear, of course, when you dry hop. But when you dry hop, on day 5, I usually dry hop, and then, of course, you're going to drop the yeast and whatever was in there from the first one. But dry hop and then rouse on the second day. The third day, basically, you're going to, dry hop, rouse, and then the next day you're going to drop the hops out and then dry hop again. Same thing, rouse the next day, drop the hops, pasty, and then crash. But by layering these dry hops, you're getting more of that impact, that saturation, again, that I think North Park, Highland Park, Green Cheek are known for. And the great thing for me is, Highland Park and Green Cheek, when I need inspiration in terms of hoppy beers, they're easily within an hour. And they're, kind of what I'm looking for. Am I getting that kind of hop saturation and character that is expected now? Again, I'm an effectively an East Coast brewer. When I came out to California, I was doing crystal malt and, Fuggles and Goldings and getting crucified. They're like, what is this? And then I go up to Yakima, do a hop school. I'm like, okay, this is what people are looking for, and of course it's no crystal malt now. And I think that's key in terms of innovation and not just copying what these other great breweries are doing, but trying to gain more oomph on those hoppy beers. And that's one aspect, again, of the variety that we do, in addition to classic lagers and now kettle sours, so that's a cool thing.
That's interesting. And as I think about, that kind of biotransformative dry hopping process, often you're thinking of intensity and punch, but here you are talking about a rice lager, which is delicate and light, and you're looking for a quality of flavor, but you're not necessarily looking for the loudest of flavors. It has to also work in balance.
Right.
And so, what you are looking for is some way of shifting some of those hop flavors into that most favorable realm where they're expressing the way that you're doing it. But it's interesting that that's such a kind of a fine tuning process rather than this amplification process.
Yeah. Yeah. The hopping has to work with the light body. It can't overwhelm it. But this hoppy rice lager we did was fantastic.
Any other places that lager innovation is taking you?
No, I mean, that's kind of it right now. It's more working on, West Coast Pills and what does that look like?
Well, that's lager innovation. What are you talking about?
Yeah. I mean, that's
yeah.
Like I said.
So tell me about West Coast Pills. I mean, here we are on the West Coast. We're sitting in the West Coast right now.
Mm-hmm.
And, it is absolutely a thing. And, I think for a lot of brewers in Southern California in particular, the idea of West Coast Pills has begun to replace the idea of pale ale, and certainly replace the idea of session IPA. I would say XPA is probably filling in some of that gap now as as a certain influence has taken over with extra pale ale. But but definitely in that 5% range, West Coast Pills is now the thing. That kind of fills that niche, that scratches that hoppy itch in that kind of ABV range. But managing that kind of hop intensity and flavor that people expect from that when you put the West Coast moniker on it, while also kind of keeping the body and lightness that people expect out of, they do expect lightness out of a Pils. That poses an interesting challenge. What are you doing with that?
I mean, you said it perfectly. I mean, where is session IPA? Where good luck selling a pale ale right now. It's sad, but they tend to be brewers' beers. We want lower ABV with hop character, but they just don't sell. And not to be cynical, but it's a little bit marketing, right? I mean, session IPA, what the heck is a session IPA? It's basically, a lower ABV
There is
pale ale.
nothing wrong with beer names as marketing.
Yeah.
As much as some brewers might want to think, oh, we're above that. Like, it's never been above that.
Right.
And as long as the industrial history of beer brewing has taken place, what we call it and how you connect those beers that brewers make with consumers and build demand for them is as important as how you brew the beers.
Yeah.
And so I think in this case, it's why cold IPA is a better brand than
IPL.
Than IPL.
Exactly. Yeah. You've got to understand, of course you always want to make world-class beer, but if you're not listening to your consumer and your guest and their confusion, or just what sounds cool. Again, pale ale, or ESB, or original bitter, special bitter. They just don't move. But you give them a West Coast Pils, that sounds really cool. Oh, okay. And most people don't even know what a Pils is or where it came from and the city of Pils and yada yada. But again, your guest, in a lot of ways, they just don't care. But what they care about is something that is new, again, a little innovative, but can take that lighter ABV and give them hop intensity, and now they've got something kind of new to play with. I mean, again, it sounds a little bit cynical, but you have to play with the marketing side. And again, going back to what Bob said, it's how many session IPAs do you see nowadays? Not many, but if you can do a West Coast Pils that has hop saturation, but not over the top, not, West Coast IPA 7% or 7.5, it's 5.2, very drinkable. They can have a few, still drive home, be safe. It's a beautiful thing. So again, running the gamut of styles is a cool thing, and understanding the trends. And again, that's a great thing. I'm an older brewer, but somebody came up with this West Coast Pils style. Embrace it and make a great one. That's it.
For sure. So let's talk about how you start to balance that, because again, managing that kind of West Coast hop character, that is certainly a more intense, slightly more dank, more peaked, kind of hop character than, say a German or a Czech Pils might typically carry. And so, making sure that using that same kind of, basic Pilsner malt base, like you've got to build some body and some support for this while also keeping it dry and very drinkable. How do you manage each of these different characters within West Coast Pils?
For me, it's using a great base malt. So often environment Pils. Honestly, if I can get, or when I use the Bow Pils, I find the thiol content with the Bow Pils, I get more actual sort of tropical character, and again, a little bit more of that biotransformation with Bow Pils. But if you're doing it, and you have to think about it production-wise, 25% Bow Pils and 75%, say, standard Great Western or RAR 2-row. But you still get more of these thiols, and you get some body to keep the foundation, or add a foundation for the hopping that you're going to do, kind of like a West Coast IPA. And for me, it's, I love Idaho 7. I love Strata. And of course, you're going to use some Citra and Mosaic and some of the classic hops. But for me, it's been a double dry hop has been the key for me. If a single dry hop, I get a little bit of
two-stage dry hop.
Two-stage dry hop, yeah. So if you want to use some flowable hop products, in the fermenter, that to me doesn't really count. That's kind of an initial. But on day 5, dry hop. Dump your yeast, of course, and then and give it a solid 2 to 3 pound per barrel dry hop.
That's a pretty significant dry hop for that scale of beer.
Yeah. But again, if you're going to, for me, when I layer those hops, and depends on which one, if you're going to use a lot of mosaic, of course, you're going to get a little more dank. But if I'm going to use, say, Citra, could be a little bit softer. I can get some dank there as well. But yeah, 2 pounds tends to be a nice spot for me. And then, like I said, rouse on that next day.
That feels like a lot, but does that have anything to do with the lower alcohol content that we're talking about there? I mean, obviously at different levels, like ethanol, itself is a fantastic extraction agent.
Yep.
And the less ethanol that is in that solution with water, you're definitely hampering your extraction ability as you get lower and lower in ABV. Does that mean you then have to kind of maybe boost some of that heft in the dry hop in order to overcome that? Or are we talking about such small differences that that's less of an effect?
I think it's less of an effect. I found that, again, personal experience, other brewers may think differently, but I found 2-pound dry hops is like a really sweet spot. If you're going hazy, sure, you can maybe go up to 2-3 pound dry hops, but for something like a West Coast Pils or even West Coast IPA, for my experience, 2-pound dry hops has worked out beautifully. I get a layering effect. I get saturation. And if I'm using great malt and I'm not over attenuating, I'm still getting, down to 2.3, 2.5 for the finishing gravity, then I'm still going to get, a nice malt base, and I'm going to get some nice balance.
Talk to me about managing all the things that are going on there, because, at the same time, you've got a Pilsner, you're dry hopping, you're trying to manage diacetyl production,
Mm-hmm.
you're also trying to spund and capture some of the natural carbonation. Those two effects are diametrically opposed to each other. How do you manage that kind of piece, through that end of fermentation dry hopping?
Of course, I do find with the hop creep, you're definitely going to attenuate a little further, but also pH is a biggie. So for a hazy IPA, I do not want that, the finishing gravity really below 3.5. And so I'll tend to raise the pH 5.2 to 5.3 for the knockout pH. So I end up with a softer, slightly higher pH, so it's not coming off so dry. West Coast IPA, maybe West Coast Pils. Again, I'm going to drop that a little bit, but I don't really want to go too far below 2. So pH is definitely one thing that I'm going to play with and be mindful of in terms of what the finishing beer pH is going to be. And again, that hop load and how that's going to play in terms of balance. But the spooning, when you spoon, you actually do, of course, I wouldn't spoon in the beginning. You're going to, basically cap it after the second dry hop. Otherwise, you're going to have a geyser. But you have to be mindful of the extra attenuation that the pressure is going to add. Spooning is, I find lagers, if I don't spoon, I'll end up at 2.5, 2.6. And when I spoon, I'm down to 2.2. So it's actually helping to further attenuate the beer and finish it out.
Interesting. Are there, you mentioned hops earlier, but do you find your choice of hops for West Coast Pilsner is a mirror of your hop choices for West Coast IPA, just at a smaller, scaled down amount? Or do you find that there are some blends or ways of using specific hops that work better at that lower ABV and in different combinations or different hop choices?
For me, in terms of what we're going to be using for a dry hop, again, we're looking at different varieties for innovation side. So I'm not always going to use Citra, Mosaic, and Simcoe. Again, we're going to look for Idaho 7 or something New Zealand, even South African, and just play with different varieties. And, the one beautiful thing about craft beer is you don't have to make a specific beer every single time. So you just play with different varieties, kind of see how they play. Of course, smash beers is a great way to understand what each individual hop is going to do. But for me, I think Hallertau Blanc has been a great one, Idaho 7. And then the Gamache, people kind of forget about Amarillo. But man, when you get Gamache, and it's, I've used the German T45s. Gamache Farms, exactly. And of course they own the trademark for Amarillo. And I think it's a hop that a lot of people have forgotten, but that kind of fruity pebbles and slightly tropical character you get with that beautiful classic Gamache Farms Amarillo is absolutely beautiful, and it's one that I try to incorporate a fair amount.
All right. Well, I think we have tapped out our lager conversation for tonight, but we should live up to the promise and flip this one on its head and go completely the opposite direction. Or maybe it's not completely the opposite. Build on this understanding of classics and this understanding of classic process. And then now that you understand the rules, break the rules with flavor-forward beers. It's something you did at Golden Road, obviously, with Mango Cart, and it's something that you've continued to do even in the Figueroa Mountain Innovation Program, making fruited sour beers that I think are really extraordinary in the way that they play with perception. They play with the idea of sweetness without necessarily providing sweetness. The beer we're drinking now, that's a peach cobbler beer that you brought, is absolutely fascinating because you smell it and you think that it's going to be this rich mouth coating sweet thing. And it turns out, that aroma gives you that kind of pleasure, and yet it remains light and drinkable. And it's, a beer that I could have a second glass of. And so I want to dive into some of the ways that you approach these fruited sour beers.
Yeah.
Start me off. Where do you start as you're writing a recipe?
Basically a 50-50 wheat and 2-row. So you are starting, you think of it sort of like Berliner Weiss, fruited Berliner Weiss. And then you want to think about your, of course, ending pH, but also total acidity. So you want to pick this is actually a dried yeast that WHC is the Helveticus. And it's going to have a lower total acidity. If I'm going to make a peach cobbler, strawberry cobbler, something a little bit more dessert type, I don't want what I normally use, which is Lactobacillus, and that's going to have a much higher total acidity. Sharper, works great with boysenberries, works great with guava. But for this one, wanting it to be a little bit more dessert-like, nice pH. 3.132.
Tell me about this yeast a little bit more. So this is a yeast. It does primary fermentation and
no. This is actually a lacto dried yeast. It's not like the Sourvisier. So you effectively, what I'm going to do is, and just recently did it. You run off your volume and then blanket it with CO2. I go into a purged fermenter at 95 degrees and then, it is definitely a cost savings. A lot of us are using dried yeast, and this is one part on the innovation side. If you don't want to spend $1,000 on a liquid pitch, you can spend a quarter of that on dried yeast. And so this is going to do, what I do is a 3-day sour, not in the kettle. It's actually going into a purged fermenter. And it's going to sour there. It's going to dry. I'll knock out about 4.3. I'll add some lactic acid in the whirlpool.
How do you keep that fermenter at 95 degrees?
It actually will drop from like 95 down to like 90. But that's the optimal range for the particular.
So you just knock out of that temperature.
Yeah, and just let it go. You don't put jackets on or anything. Yeah. No. But what I found is a 1-day kettle sour is kind of like, it's nice. It's fine. 2-day gives you a little bit more of the tartness and the TA that I'm looking, total acidity I'm looking for. And that 3-day was like, and I've gone extra, I had something happen on one of the days. So I went 4 days. It didn't really change. But man, that difference between a 1-day and a 3 or 4 day kettle, sitting sour with that lactic acid bacteria is a huge difference. Then you're going to take it, move it back to the kettle. I actually did a pre-boil before, knocking out at 95. Bring it back, boil it again for another 30 to 60 minutes, add some hops, add some calcium chloride at that point, and then I'm going to bring it back into the clean fermenter and use US-05 or a cal ale to ferment that out.
As I think about it, Lactobacillus helveticus, that is the culture that cheesemakers use.
Okay.
And I believe that's the, let's say the Gruyere makers and the Comté cheesemakers, I mean, I believe that's Lactobacillus helveticus. I don't know if it's the same exact variety, but at least it's the same family. That's interesting to find that commonality there.
Yeah. So again, you've got different bacteria that you can use, different lacto, and then
but why that lacto? What do you find that lacto produces that you don't get and versus something like Brevis that's going to give you something different?
Yeah. Again, the Brevis is going to give me a higher total acidity. It's going to be sharper, almost barrel age acidic. And that's a sour, where this one is more of a tart.
When you talk about total acidity levels, like what are your grams per liter?
For this one is about 0.5, and then the Lactobrevis will get up to about 0.8 to 1. Okay. And I'm just using kind of a wine, titration kit that you get at any wine supply for, I think it was actually tartaric acid, but it works for the lactic. And you measure that and again, 0.4, 0.5. Hey, it's nice and tart, and it works great with, 1.3 pounds per gallon of peach puree, a little bit of ground cinnamon, ground vanilla bean in the fermenter to create this sort of peach cobbler-like character, and then strain it into the bright, and off you go. So, again,
you make it sound so easy.
Well, it's bench trials, and it's also, I've been doing this for several years, and the cool thing is when you drink it and you're pretty stoked on it, or people at the barn, they're like, that tastes like peach pie or tastes like peach cobbler. Do I want to be the fruit beer brewer? No, but again, my background is classic styles. It's Helles, it's Schwartz, it's Dunkel, it's Pils, Imperial Russian Stout and Porter, and again, just classic styles, because back in the 90s, it was Bud, Coors, and Miller and all those styles at Dock Street. And, as we tasted them in the 90s and the 2000s, it's all great. But as my wife likes to say, not everybody drinks beer. They want something different that doesn't just taste like quote unquote beer. And now they found a beverage that they can enjoy, that they feel included in this craft beer thing, or just at a restaurant with friends. They're going to a pub and they're like, God, I really don't drink beer, but sure, I'll go out. And they're like, hey, we got this peach cobbler beer. And they're like, this is pretty darn cool. Or a mango cart, or, whatever it is, a seltzer, Evan's lavender seltzer, like people go crazy over, because he understands, and other brewers like us understand, that it isn't just fitting in a box, right? I mean, I look at the old Gordon beers. We make German lager. That's it. Well, you're in California. You don't make an IPA. So they struggled, right? And I looked to that and I learned, and not that I'm trying to throw anybody under the bus, but you learn from maybe others' mistakes, my mistakes, whatever it is, and have an inclusive, again, kind of pie in the sky, but that you want that hospitality, that Danny Meyer third place. This is where people feel comfortable, they feel included, they feel welcome. And that's what it's all about. It's like, make great beer, but also, don't make people feel bad that they don't want a West Coast IPA. Here's a fruited wheat beer, and they're like, cool, this is awesome.
If you think that fruited kettle soured beers are an atrocity and a crime against beer, but you drink cocktails or tiki drinks, then maybe, and you don't drink your spirits perfectly neat, then maybe you should rethink your ideological consistency.
Exactly where it comes from. Yep. Yeah, I love my cocktails, love wine. I keep my palate fresh by drinking other beverages. And then when I have to come up with something like this, I think I still remember GABF like 15 years ago. I think it was Short's Brewery. I think they're out of Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I had a kiwi pie beer. And I'm like, what the heck is this? And it tasted exactly like the fruit that they were describing.
Sure.
That was 15 years ago. I don't even know, honestly, if Shorts is still around. They are. Yeah.
They're still making interesting flavorful beer. They're also pushing, some. I've actually reached out to them about a podcast. Hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure it will in the future. They're doing some interesting things with terpenes, and and in fact, that brings to mind, like, you also are interested in playing in this kind of terpene world, and using
abstracts.
Some of
I mean, I don't mind naming the names. Others are doing. We
didn't really finish talking about this peach cobbler beer because you're using a vanilla powder,
right,
as you brew this
vanilla bean powder.
Vanilla bean powder.
Yeah.
Tell me about using that versus more like whole bean vanilla process.
A lot easier. I mean, and the saturation is a lot quicker. It's a place, the sweetest bean. It's Ugandan vanilla bean powder. If anybody's partial to Madagascar or Tahitian or, Mexican vanilla beans, that's all good. But the quality is there. The company's great. They're socially conscious. And then I use, your just standard, chilling or whatever ground cinnamon. In making pumpkin ale for the last literally 30 years or so, I started looking at other spices that, are more organic and whatnot. But when you make pumpkin pie, pumpkin spice latte, people expect basic spices. And so these others that were not what people expected in terms of, again, your standard baking spice, then they were turned off a little bit. They're like, I don't really get the cinnamon. I'm like, but it's this organic cinnamon. It's a Ceylon and yada, yada. And they're like, but I don't get the cinnamon. It doesn't taste like pumpkin pie. And so for this, I just use standard cinnamon because, again, it's what people expect and what they're going to use in their home in a peach cobbler. And it just gives a hint of cinnamon. But that vanilla bean just adds a roundness to the body. You still get the tartness from the lacto, from the kettle souring, and then you do your bench trial. This turned out it could be 0.8, it could be 0.9. I've done 1.5. The 1.3 gave me the drinkability, the saturation, the nose. There's no top note on this. And you put your nose in it, you're like, damn, that's peach pie, peach cobbler. But again, doing a boysenberry, doing a mango, doing pineapple or guava, it's simply experience and doing kind of the bench trials to hit that point where nobody wants a sweet beer, but you do want you want it to be there. If I tell you it's a coffee beer and you're like, I kind of get coffee, then you kind of blew it. But if you get 6 inches from your nose, you should start smelling coffee, mango, whatever the fruit is, in my mind.
And some of these fruits honestly really need that idea of sweetness in order to, fill out the idea of the fruit flavor. That fruit flavor alone without that sweetness doesn't actually, convey as that fruit. And so, that I think that vanilla is an interesting trick, as other brewers have mentioned here on the podcast, to help create the idea of that sweetness and help set that sweetness idea in the brain while not having the beer actually be that sweet, because you still need it to finish dry and be drinkable for another glass.
Yeah, you can't have it cloyingly sweet. Now, I'm also not against top notes. All the Sovereigns and other companies that we use for top note. You can put as much blueberry in a beer as you want, but you're not going to get. People are not going to get that organoleptic blueberry. You put, half an ounce per barrel or whatever, a quarter ounce, or depending on the extract. And as long as it's, natural blueberry, mango, whatever it is, people expect it to pop a little bit more. You don't want Jolly Rancher. You don't want artificial. But if I say, again, blueberry or mango or pineapple, those three actually need a top note. Guava definitely does not. Strawberry does, and peach doesn't. But you just have to play with it. And I'm not opposed. I've heard other, on the podcast, other brewers say I'm only going to use the fruit, and if I can't do it with the fruit, then to heck with it, and they can take it or leave it. And I'm like, to me, it's about the guest, and it's about the balance of the beer. And if I need to top note it with a natural extract, then why not? Again, if the beer is going to be better. And you got to look at sales. It's not just you're sacrificing your integrity by using a top note. You have to make a world-class beer, and it's got to sell. So make people happy.
Well, it has to meet people's expectations.
Yeah, exactly right.
And we have had interesting conversations over the course of the podcast. Folks like Andrew Bell, folks like Corey Artanis, Andrew at Radiant, Corey at Three Sons. They've been very open about. You're building layers of these things, and that top note, as you call it, which I think is a very strategic and nice way of saying extract, layered on top of that, say you take that fruit puree and then also add some of that fruit extract. It creates that aromatic component that seems to survive more in that space. If you just use the extract, then obviously you're getting a less fully developed, less complex, less interesting, less real, less convincing, kind of flavor. And maybe that's not the way that you want to do it. You want to work these things in concert a bit.
Right. Yeah. If you're relying on the extract and to just save money because you don't want to spend the money on the fruit, then it's going to come off artificial. But if you use the fruit and the flavor, my flavor houses have been very upfront. They're like, look, this is simply to complement what you're trying to do, to give it, again, as you said, to meet the expectation, not to, just create this candy in a glass, which is going to be cloying and not even one and done. It's like, a sample and done. So I'm happy, proud that the fruit beers that we do are great and people love them. But then they can also have, a German Pils. They can have a Helles. They can have a West Coast IPA. They can have an oatmeal stout. And we work with Portola Coffee, and we do coffee stouts and coffee porters and all that kind of stuff. That, again, it's just, it widens the range of what you're able to offer. And then people who, again, I'm not a beer drinker, but damn that coffee stagecoach stout or Cafe Magpie that we did it was ridiculous and keeps them coming back.
Sure. Talk to me about using abstracts, hop, terpenes and whatnot.
Yeah, it's kind of the same idea. They approached us, I think, over at Golden Road. We met, and so I've been using them for at least 5 years now, and just started playing with them. And over that time, they've just absolutely dialed in this means of, and of course they come from the weed industry, so they understand terpenes, they understand all the flavor and aroma compounds that go into hops. And it's simply another means of adding a layer. And I know, not going to name names, but I know there are some very world-class breweries in the area that use them. And there's nothing wrong with it. Again, if you're using primarily hops, and then you want to add a little bit more saturation, that's exactly what it's for. And now they've come up with, again, a Citra, the Mosaic. They've got variety specific extracts, basically, that one can save you money, especially on the production side. If you were doing 4 pounds per barrel, now you're doing maybe 2. And, the process losses there that can be incredible are now reduced. And so they pay for themselves the first time you use them. But they're very natural. And again, you're not going to change out, 3 pounds and add the abstracts. It's going to either 50%, even 25% is going to be a big boost. But the integrity, the quality of their product and how it integrates into beer seamlessly is pretty awesome, fascinating, fun, and it's one more thing to play with. As I listen to your podcast and all the other IPA brewers, everybody, IPA now relative to what it was 20 years ago is night and day, and it's so much more. I love it actually because it's a lot less bitter. The IBU wars are over. You're not trying to get over 100 IBU and scrape the enamel off your teeth. It's more hop flavor, hop aroma. The synergy of different hops. And that's the beauty. And again, it used to be, oh my God, I'm not contracted for 10,000 pounds of Amarillo or Simcoe or Idaho 7 or whatever it is. Now there's so many different substitutions or I get it. I was hearing, Vinny, he's got his, the Pliny the Elder, but even that's changed, but an expectation. And then you listen to Evan and Kelsey, and that's more how I think of it, is like the guest expects a new experience. They're okay if you had to sub out your Chinook or Cascade or, whatever hop you were using, or, Nelson or Motueka, and you've got Rakau and you've got something else, that you can actually sub in, Galaxy, and you're getting that tropical pop that they're looking for. They're perfectly open to it. There's very few brands, even Sierra Nevada Pale, I'm sure, and I've heard that that's not just the specific Cascade. They have to be able to integrate different hops in order to get that character.
Sure. Well, we've been talking for a while now. Let's zoom out and look at big picture. You brewed in a lot of places for a lot of number of years. At this stage in your career, What are you most excited about, and what concerns you the most with where we are today, and what are you most excited about?
Concerned definitely for the Gen Z, and I respect it, but people are drinking a lot less or abstaining completely. So when people say, "Hey, I don't drink," I'm like, "Hey, good for you, health wise." If it's health conscious, that's your choice. But man, does it mean more difficulty in terms of sales and getting people excited for these other beer styles and the innovation and, kind of the marketing side, whether it's West Coast Pills and what are you going to call it, or come up with just a cool name. My example I always use is kind of Noble's Naughty Sauce. Hey, we have a golden milk stout with coffee. Cool. You'll sell, a keg a month. But, excuse me, you have Naughty Sauce. Now you've got branding on the hats and the shirts and everything else. So make quality world-class beer. But if you're not understanding the marketing side, you're leaving a lot of sales, behind. So it's just trying to stay current in terms of beer names. Thank God we've gotten away from all the kind of overly, sexual innuendo, and it's more just playing off of cultural references, and that's all the fun stuff. But I'd say that's it more than anything is the NA, we're actually in the NA space, and that has been really positive for us. But you look at what Athletic is doing and all the others, you're just blown away and impressed, and embrace it. Don't just say, well, to heck with it. We're not going to, we don't do NA beer. It's like, why not? Let's give it a shot and come up with some cool stuff. And that's where the abstracts actually came in for us. We needed something that was going to, that's the interesting thing on the NA side. After they de-alk and you try to dry hop, it's just all the vegetative matter and it comes out green and it's awful. Well, here comes abstracts, and they've got these beautiful natural smelling and tasting hop products. You can still use hops on the hot side, but the abstracts on the cold side, or, I'm sure the others are using, again, Hopkeep and these other ones that I keep reading about. I haven't used them, but, on the cold side, beautiful, aromatic, punchy hop products. Fantastic. So I think for that's pretty exciting. And but I still brew on a 15 barrel, my whole career, even though I was brewmaster at Golden Road and doing all the big, 700 barrel batches and all that, and being responsible for quality but my background, my passion, and my fun has always been working in the brewery. I don't want to be on a laptop, and so, helps me maintain my weight and not moving around as well as I did maybe. But you get an assistant and you get that. And if you ask me what else is exciting, it's just when, younger brewers come in and we talk shop like we are now, like I just did with a kid from 14 Cannons. And we just, while I was working and setting up for the next day's brew, I love dispensing information. Tell people I'm not God's gift to brewing, but I have a lot of experience, and we have these conversations, and I'm not going to tell them I'm going to dictate how you should do it. But hey, what did you do? And having those brewers conversations is how I learn, how I stay excited, and how I can help them. And he's like, this is really cool. I learned a lot. I'm like, that's awesome. And that's what my, I wouldn't say role, but that's kind of where I've kind of found my little niche, I think, is when people have a question, I'm always happy. Here's my cell phone number, and let's talk.
Well, Victor, it has been fantastic to tap into your brewer brain and try to understand your approach to making all of these diverse beer styles, from traditional style lagers up into these most progressive beer styles. Your passion's palpable, and I think this is a great place to bring it to a close. Choose G&D chillers in your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote controlled monitoring. Take your operations to the next level with the experts at ProBrew. Old Orchard is the go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5 gives you juicy modern hop flavors without the haze. Take back control of your canning and seaming with the experts at RSS Macklin. Trust Indie Hop's unique varieties to modernize, brighten, and diversify your beer lineup. Berkeley yeast strains are designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency. Visit breweryworkshop.com for more information about the upcoming brewery and distillery workshop this September. And if you're a distiller or curious about it, check out the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, become a subscriber just like Victor is. You can check out our magazine both in digital and print on the website in PDF form in our app. And of course, if you're a subscriber, you have full access to the entire digital archives of Craft Beer and Brewing magazine and all of the phenomenal recipes from great brewers that are included therein. Victor, if people want to learn more about you, your brewing history, Figueroa Mountain, the innovation work that you're doing for Figueroa, all of these other things, where can I find you guys out in the world?
figmountainbrew.com. It's figmountainbrew.com. I don't mind giving out my email, victor@figmountainbrew.com, victor@figmtnbrew.com. Email me. Hopefully, I had a blast. My biggest fear, my insecurity is boring people. So hopefully this was kind of cool. I enjoyed it. And again, if people want to email me or just have a great conversation at GABF or World Beer Cup, this is what I love, and it is my passion. I love it.
Well, we had a phenomenal conversation at GABF last year. I think I went back several times for, I think it was a boysenberry fruited sour beer. It's not something I would typically do at GABF, but it was so interesting, compelling, and nicely balanced that I kept drinking it.
Killer.
We talked about doing this podcast, and then it came up where we had the opportunity here. I appreciate you driving down here and meeting up with me, so that we could talk about brewing and drink some beer about it.
Enjoyed it. Yeah, you're always amazing. And again, I know we stroke your ego, but this is a godsend to all of us homebrewers and professional brewers alike.
Well, you just found your way into my heart, Victor. It's been phenomenal talking to you. Cheers.
Cheers. Salut.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.